The tarmac gleamed wet under the floodlights, reflecting fractured patterns of red and white from the emergency vehicles staged nearby. Rain fell in sheets, the kind of relentless downpour that turned everything into fluid motion, water streaming off aircraft fuselages, pooling in depressions across the concrete, creating rivers that flowed toward the drainage grates with purposeful determination. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the edge of Hangar Bay 3, positioned in that peculiar space where light from inside met darkness from outside, creating a threshold that felt both physical and symbolic. She watched the mission brief unfold at the operations desk 20 feet away, close enough to hear every word, far enough that nobody acknowledged she was there. The wind carried voices to her in fragments. "Weather's deteriorating faster than predicted. We need wheels up in 30 minutes. Where the hell is our primary pilot?" A young specialist squeezed past her carrying a medical kit, his shoulder brushing hers as he navigated the narrow space between the wall and a stack of equipment cases. "Excuse me, ma'am." The words were polite but automatic, delivered without eye contact, the tone you'd use for a visitor who didn't quite belong in a restricted area. She moved aside without comment, hands relaxed at her sides, gaze tracking the weather system building over the mountain range to the north. The clouds stacked against the peaks like a siege force, dark and purposeful. She'd watched systems like this before, had flown through them more times than she cared to count. There was a rhythm to how storms moved across this terrain, a pattern in the chaos that became readable once you'd logged enough hours in these mountains. The windsock near the far end of the runway snapped and twisted, its movements telling a story the weather forecast hadn't quite captured yet. Thunder growled in the distance, a low rumble that vibrated through the concrete beneath her boots. The radio on the ops desk crackled with fragmentary transmissions, voices compressed and distorted by distance and interference. Somewhere beyond those ridges, people were waiting for help that might not arrive in time. Sarah's right hand moved unconsciously to her pocket, fingers finding the familiar shape of her grandmother's compass. The metal was warm from her body heat, smooth from decades of handling. She didn't pull it out, not here, not where others might see and ask questions, but just touching it through the fabric of her flight suit brought a measure of calm. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss these real stories of service and sacrifice. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from today. The operations center was a study in controlled chaos. Maps covered the walls, marked with grease pencil notations in multiple colors, red for enemy positions, blue for friendly forces, green for safe corridors that were never quite as safe as they appeared on paper. Computer screens glowed with real-time intelligence feeds. The smell of coffee fought with the smell of aviation fuel that permeated everything on this base, no matter how far you were from the flight line. Major Williams stood at the center of it all, running the brief with the kind of tired competence that came from too many missions and not enough sleep. He was a good officer, Sarah had learned that much in her 3 months here, but he carried the burden of too many decisions with too little perfect information. Every mission was a calculated risk. Every launch was a gamble that the odds would hold one more time. "Coalition patrol hit an ambush here," Williams said, tapping a point on the digital map display. "Grid November Victor 7245. Multiple casualties, enemy forces holding the high ground. Weather window is closing fast. If we don't get them out in the next hour, we won't get them out at all." The assembled crew members leaned in, studying the terrain with the focused attention of people whose lives might depend on understanding it. Sarah could see it from where she stood, the narrow valley, the steep ridges on either side, the single approach corridor that looked so inviting on a screen and would be so deadly in reality. She'd flown that valley before, not on this deployment, but 2 years ago during her previous rotation. She remembered the way wind funneled through the passes, the way updrafts and downdrafts created invisible walls of turbulence that could flip an aircraft if you hit them wrong. She remembered the way visibility could drop to nothing in seconds when clouds descended, turning navigation into a high-stakes guessing game where the cost of guessing wrong was measured in lives. Her hand tightened around the compass in her pocket. not from nervousness, but from the muscle memory of preparation, the physical ritual that helped her mind shift into the focused state she needed for difficult flying. "Sir," the voice came from Lieutenant Morrison, the unit's senior weather officer. He was young but thorough, the kind of person who checked his data 3 times before committing to a forecast. "I'm seeing some concerning trends in the atmospheric pressure. That front is moving faster than the regional models predicted, and it's carrying more moisture. Once it hits those mountains, we're going to see rapid cloud formation at multiple altitudes."
Williams nodded, processing the information without visible reaction. "How long do we have?" "Current conditions are marginal but acceptable. In 30 minutes, they'll be marginal and deteriorating. In an hour—" Morrison hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "In an hour, I wouldn't want to be in that valley." "Then we launch in 20 minutes, Williams decided. "Captain Bradley, your primary pilot. Lieutenant Vaughn, co-pilot. Standard rescue configuration. Medics, security team, extraction equipment. Questions?" There were none. This was a crew that had flown together before, that understood their roles without needing extensive briefings. They started moving immediately, grabbing gear, heading toward the ready room to suit up. Sarah remained at her post near the hangar entrance, watching the organized chaos of a military unit preparing for a dangerous mission. Part of her wanted to step forward to offer the tactical knowledge she'd accumulated about that terrain, but experience had taught her that unsolicited advice from someone with her reputation was worse than no advice at all. She checked her watch, a simple analog timepiece with luminous hands, the kind that would still work if all the electronics failed. 22 minutes until the planned launch. Time measured itself out in heartbeats and breaths, each second bringing the mission closer to the moment of commitment. The rain intensified, drumming on the hangar roof with renewed force. Through the open bay door, Sarah watched sheets of water sweep across the tarmac, backlit by the floodlights into something that looked almost solid. The helicopter they'd be flying sat on the pad 50 meters away, a Sikorsky UH-60 Blackhawk configured for medical evacuation. Even from this distance, she could see the careful preparation, the rotor blades tied down against the wind, the engine covers in place to protect critical systems from the weather, the ground crew making final checks before they'd clear it for flight. Chief Warrant Officer Rodriguez supervised the pre-flight inspection with the methodical attention to detail that had kept aircraft flying for the past 23 years. Sarah had worked with him extensively during her first weeks here, back when nobody was quite sure what to do with a pilot who wasn't flying. Rodriguez had put her to work helping with maintenance, treating her just like another pair of hands rather than a problem to be managed. "You got pilot's hands," he'd told her once, watching the way she checked connections and verified torque settings. "Most officers, they walk past birds like they're furniture. You treat them like they're alive." She'd appreciated the observation because Rodriguez was someone who earned his opinions through experience rather than accepting them secondhand from rumors and gossip. A gust of wind hit the hangar, rattling the metal walls hard enough to make conversation pause for a moment. When the noise subsided, Sarah heard fragments of a new discussion from the ops center. "Medical hold, can't be cleared. Are you kidding me? We launch in 15 minutes. Regulations are clear, sir, if he's not cleared by the flight surgeon." Sarah's attention sharpened. Something had changed. She moved closer to the ops center, staying at the periphery but close enough now to hear clearly. Captain Bradley stood in front of Major Williams' desk, frustration evident in every line of his body. "Sir, I understand the regulations, but this is ridiculous. I had a minor sinus issue this morning, took some over-the-counter medication, and now the doc won't clear me because it's not on the approved list." Williams rubbed his face with both hands, the gesture of a man calculating odds he didn't like. "Can you fly?" "Yes, sir. I feel fine. The medication was just—" "That's not what I asked, Captain. Can you legally fly? Because if you can't and something happens, we're all liable. This entire mission gets scrutinized, every decision questioned. You know how this works." Bradley's shoulders sagged slightly. He knew. They all knew. The military ran on regulations because regulations were how you survived the investigations that came after things went wrong. Following the rules might not always produce the best outcome, but it protected you from being blamed for the outcome you got. "No, sir," Bradley admitted. "Technically, I'm not cleared to fly." The operations center went quiet in a way that felt heavy, oppressive. Every person there understood what this meant. The primary pilot was grounded, the mission was now in jeopardy, and wounded soldiers were waiting in a valley while weather closed in around them.
Williams turned to his operations sergeant. "Who else do we have?" "Lieutenant Morrison could fly, but he's already committed his weather officer for 3 other missions tonight. Captain Rodriguez has the hours, but he hasn't flown operational rescue in 2 years, mostly does training flights now. Lieutenant Reeves is qualified, but she's at the infirmary with the flu, and the standby crews are all committed to other taskings." Williams stared at the mission board as if the right answer might appear if he looked hard enough. "What about pulling someone from another unit?" "Nearest qualified crew is at Bagram. They couldn't get here for at least 90 minutes, probably 2 hours given this weather. And in 2 hours, those soldiers are dead." He said it flatly, stating a fact rather than expressing emotion. This was the calculus of command, adding up the variables, calculating probabilities, knowing that every decision carried consequences measured in human lives. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a sensation like a door opening after being closed for a long time. She knew what came next. She'd known it from the moment she'd heard the mission brief, had felt it building through every minute of preparation and delay. This was the moment her grandmother's compass had been pointing toward, the true north she'd been navigating toward even when she didn't realize it. She stepped forward, crossing that invisible boundary between observer and participant. "Sir." Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the discussion clearly enough that every head in the operations center turned toward her. Major Williams looked up, surprised to find her there, as if she'd materialized out of the shadows instead of standing where she'd been for the past 30 minutes. "Captain Chen." His tone was neutral, waiting to hear what she had to say before deciding how to react. "Sir, I can fly this mission." The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. This wasn't the quiet of people thinking. This was the quiet of people processing something unexpected and trying to figure out how to respond. Williams studied her face, and she could see him running calculations. She was qualified, there was no question about that. Her flight hours exceeded most of the pilots on the base. She knew the terrain, knew the aircraft, knew the procedures, but she also carried baggage, unofficial but undeniable. The rumors about her past, the questions about whether she could be trusted in a high-stress situation, the unspoken belief that there was a reason she hadn't been flying operational missions. "You're not on the flight roster," Williams said carefully. "No, sir, but I'm current, I know this terrain, and I can have us airborne in," she checked her watch, "12 minutes. The co-pilot can handle right seat duties. I'll take command pilot." Someone in the back of the operations center muttered something Sarah didn't quite catch. Someone else said, "Is she serious?" Lieutenant Morrison, the weather officer, spoke up. "Sir, with respect, Captain Chen has more mountain flying hours than anyone else on this base. She flew this exact valley system on her previous deployment." Sarah glanced at Morrison, surprised by the support. He met her eyes briefly, gave a slight nod. Apparently, someone had been paying attention to more than just the rumors. Major Williams drummed his desk, a nervous habit he probably didn't know he had. "Captain Chen, your last assignment ended under circumstances that raised questions." "Yes, sir." Sarah kept her voice level, refusing to show the sting those words carried. "But those circumstances have nothing to do with my ability to fly this mission. Right now, you need a pilot who can navigate through deteriorating weather to reach casualties before the window closes. I can do that." The radio on Williams' desk crackled to life with another transmission from the embattled patrol. "Echo 7, this is Viper 2-1. We have 3 critical casualties, taking sustained fire from multiple positions. We need medevac. Repeat, we need medevac, now." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by static and the distant sound of gunfire. Williams made his decision. "Get your gear, Captain. You've got the aircraft. But understand this, if anything goes wrong, the spotlight is going to be intense, on you, on me, on this entire operation. The choice you're making right now carries weight. You understand that?"
"Yes, sir, I understand." "Then go. Clock's running." Sarah didn't waste time acknowledging the order or expressing gratitude. She just moved, turning on her heel and heading for the ready room where her flight gear had been hanging, untouched for 3 months. Behind her, she heard Williams on the radio. "All stations, be advised we have a crew change. Captain Chen is taking command pilot. Mission launches in 10 minutes." The response from various stations around the base was subdued, professional. But Sarah knew the real response would be happening in hushed conversations, in raised eyebrows, in the unspoken questions about whether this was a good idea. She pushed those thoughts aside. There would be time for doubt later, time for second-guessing and analysis. Right now, there was only the mission. The ready room smelled of leather and sweat, the accumulated odors of hundreds of pilots suiting up for flights over the past months and years. Sarah's flight gear hung on its designated hook, right where she'd left it after her last training flight. The helmet still had her call sign stenciled on it, Compass. Someone had started calling her that during her first deployment, and the nickname had stuck, though most people on this base probably didn't know why.
She pulled on the flight suit with practiced efficiency, fingers working the zippers and fasteners automatically. The survival vest came next, heavy with emergency equipment, radio, flares, first aid kit, strobe light, knife, all the gear that might mean the difference between life and death if you had to punch out over hostile territory. Her holster went on her right hip, the weight of the M9 pistol familiar and oddly comforting. Gloves, kneeboard, checklist, each item had its place, each served its purpose. She moved through the ritual of preparation with the calm focus that had always defined her approach to flying. This wasn't about proving herself or redeeming her reputation. This was about soldiers who needed help and a mission that needed to be flown. Her grandmother's compass went into the left chest pocket of her flight suit, positioned where she could feel its weight over her heart. She touched it once through the fabric, a silent acknowledgement of the path that had led her to this moment. When she walked out of the ready room, Lieutenant Vaughn was waiting in the corridor. The young co-pilot looked nervous, his face pale in the fluorescent lighting. He was 24 years old, qualified but inexperienced, the kind of pilot who'd logged most of his hours in training environments rather than operational missions. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I'll be flying right seat." "Good to have you, Lieutenant." She kept her tone professional, giving him no opening to voice whatever concerns he might be carrying. "You current on the UH-60? "Yes, ma'am. Just finished my qualification check ride last month." "Outstanding. We'll be using standard crew resource management protocols. I'll handle primary flight controls and tactical decisions. You back me up on instruments, communications, and systems management. You see something I miss, you speak up immediately. No hesitation. Understood?" "Understood, ma'am." They walked together toward the aircraft, rain hitting their flight helmets with sharp taps that sounded like impatient fingers drumming. The ground crew had already removed the rotor blade ties and engine covers, preparing the aircraft for immediate launch. Rodriguez stood near the nose, checking something on his tablet. He looked up as Sarah approached, his weathered face unreadable in the harsh glare of the floodlights. For a moment she thought he might question her presence, might add his voice to the chorus of doubt she'd been hearing for months. Instead, he just nodded. "She's ready to fly, Captain. Full fuel, all systems green, medical equipment loaded and secured, crews already aboard." "Thank you, Chief. You know this bird, you know this terrain, you got this." He said it matter-of-factly, a statement of observed reality rather than reassurance. Then he stepped back, giving her clear access to the aircraft. Sarah climbed into the left seat, the command pilot's position, settling into the space with the familiar comfort of someone returning home after a long absence. Her hands moved across the instrument panel automatically, checking switches and gauges even before she began the formal pre-flight checklist.
Lieutenant Vaughn took the right seat, pulling out his own checklist and positioning his knee board. In the back, she could hear the medical team making final adjustments to their equipment, the security team checking weapons and ammunition loads, everyone preparing for a mission that had suddenly become more uncertain than it had been 10 minutes ago. "Before start checklist," Sarah announced over the intercom, her voice calm and professional. "Battery on. Generator 1 and 2.
She ran through the procedures with methodical precision, each step executed exactly as it should be, building the aircraft from a collection of dormant systems into a machine ready to fly. Vaughn called out responses, his nervousness gradually fading as he fell into the rhythm of the checklist. Outside, Rodriguez gave the signal for clear rotors. Sarah initiated the engine start sequence, feeling the aircraft come alive around her, the whine of the turbines spooling up, the increasing vibration as the main rotor began to turn, the whole machine transforming from static metal into something dynamic and purposeful. "Echo 7, Rescue 1, radio check," the tower controller's voice crackled in her headset. "Rescue 1 reads you 5 by 5. Sarah's response was automatic, professional. "Rescue 1, you are cleared for immediate departure. Wind 270 at 18, gusting to 25. Current ceiling 3,000 feet, visibility 3 miles in rain. Altimeter 2987. Emergency services standing by." Rescue 1 copies all, departing to the north. Sarah brought the engines to flight idle, watching the gauges climb into their operating ranges. All indications were normal: hydraulics, transmission, fuel, flight controls. The aircraft was ready. The crew was ready. The question was whether the pilot was ready, whether 3 months of being grounded had eroded skills that took years to develop, whether the rumors and doubts had seeped into her confidence enough to create hesitation at a critical moment. She pushed the thoughts aside. This was exactly the kind of mental noise that led to mistakes. The only thing that mattered was the mission in front of her, the steps that needed to be executed, the decisions that needed to be made. Her hand moved to the collective, fingers wrapping around the grip with the comfortable familiarity of a handshake from an old friend. She took one more breath, centered herself, and made her decision. "Tower, Rescue 1 is ready for departure. Rescue 1 cleared for takeoff. Godspeed." Sarah smoothly increased collective pitch, feeling the aircraft respond to her input. The skids lifted off the tarmac in a controlled, stable hover. She made minor adjustments with the cyclic and pedals, compensating for the wind that tried to push them sideways. And then they were climbing into the storm, leaving the safety of the base behind, committed to a mission that would test everything she'd learned in 15 years of flying military helicopters. The base disappeared beneath them in seconds, swallowed by darkness and rain. Sarah transitioned from hover to forward flight smoothly, gaining altitude as they climbed away from the surrounding terrain. The cockpit instruments glowed softly. Altitude, airspeed, heading, all the information she needed to navigate through conditions where visual reference points had ceased to exist. Rescue 1 departure, switching to en route frequency. Roger, Rescue 1, good hunting. Sarah changed the radio to the tactical frequency that would connect them to the operations center and the patrol they were trying to reach. Immediately, the calm professionalism of tower communications was replaced by the controlled urgency of people in contact. "Need suppression on the North Ridge. Casualty is critical. We're losing him. Anyone have eyes on that RPG team?" Vaughn glanced at her, the stress evident in his eyes, even behind his visor. This was probably his first hot extraction, his first time flying into an active firefight. Sarah gave him a slight nod, a wordless message: "Stay focused, trust your training."
"Lieutenant, pull up the tactical display. I want to see the terrain between us and the objective." "Yes, ma'am." Vaughn's fingers moved across the multi-function display, bringing up the digital map with their position marked as a blue icon moving across the screen. The objective was 23 miles to the northeast, tucked into a valley system that looked deceptively simple on a two-dimensional map. Sarah studied the terrain with the eyes of someone who'd learned to read landscapes in 3 dimensions. The main valley ran roughly east-west, with steep ridges on either side, rising to peaks that topped 8,000 feet. Multiple smaller valleys branched off from the main corridor, creating a maze of terrain where weather could trap you, where enemies could hide, where a wrong turn could leave you flying into a dead end with no room to maneuver. The standard approach, the one I knew Captain Bradley would have taken, was to follow the main valley directly to the objective. It was the shortest distance, the most obvious route, which was exactly why it was the wrong choice tonight. "Change of plans," Sarah announced over the crew intercom. "We're not taking the direct route. We're going to swing south, use the secondary valley system to approach from an unexpected angle." There was a pause before Vaughn responded. "Ma'am, that adds almost 15 minutes to our flight time." "I know, but the direct route is going to be a kill zone. The wind's funneling through that main valley, creating wind shear that'll tear us apart if we try to thread it. Plus, the enemy knows that's how we'd come in. They'll have positions set up to engage us the moment we appear. The patrol needs us now, and they'll need us even more if we get shot down or crash trying to take a shortcut through bad terrain in worse weather." Sarah kept her voice level, patient. This wasn't the time for ego or command by authority. She needed Vaughn to understand the tactical logic, to be a partner in the decision rather than just following orders. She adjusted our heading, banking the aircraft gently to the right. The aircraft responded smoothly, precisely, giving her the feedback she needed to maintain spatial awareness even when she couldn't see anything beyond the cockpit windows except darkness and rain.
Think about it, Lieutenant. If you were the enemy commander, where would you position your troops to stop a rescue attempt? Vaughn studied the map, and she could almost see his mind working through the problem. I'd put teams on the high ground, overlooking the main approach, maybe here and here. He pointed to 2 ridges that commanded the valley. Wait for the helicopter to come through, hit it from multiple angles in a confined space where it can't maneuver. Exactly, which is why we're not going to fly into their ambush. We're going to come in from a direction they're not watching, use the terrain to mask our approach, and be on the ground extracting casualties before they realize we're there. But ma'am, the secondary valley, the maps show significant terrain. We'd be flying through narrow passages in low visibility. Sarah allowed herself a small smile, though Vaughn couldn't see it behind her visor. "I've flown this route before. 2 years ago, during my previous rotation. There's a passage here." She pointed to a gap in the ridges that barely showed on the map. "That'll take us through to the objective valley without exposing us to direct observation. It's tight, but it's doable." "In this weather?" "Especially in this weather. The clouds will be sitting right on the peaks, but that gap stays relatively clear because of the way wind moves through it. We'll have just enough visibility to navigate." Vaughn absorbed this information, clearly weighing whether to trust her judgment or voice further concerns. Sarah appreciated that he was thinking critically rather than just accepting her authority. That kind of crew resource management, where everyone felt empowered to speak up, was what kept flight crews alive. "Okay," he said finally. "I trust your experience, ma'am, but I'm going to monitor our position constantly and call out any concerns." "That's exactly what I need you to do, Lieutenant. You're not just along for the ride, you're my safety net." They flew in silence for minutes, the helicopter punching through turbulence that would have been concerning to most pilots, but was merely annoying to Sarah. She'd learned long ago that weather was like any opponent. You had to respect it without fearing it, read its patterns without letting them intimidate you.
The rain intensified, hammering the windscreen hard enough that the wipers struggled to keep up. Visibility dropped to maybe a quarter mile, then less. Vaughn tensed in his seat, his hands moving instinctively toward his own flight controls before he forced himself to relax. "First time flying in conditions like this?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice conversational. "Yes, ma'am. Most of my hours have been in clear weather or light rain, nothing like this. The key is trusting your instruments more than your eyes. Your brain wants visual reference points, wants to see where you're going. But in weather like this, your eyes will lie to you. The instruments tell you the truth." She tapped the attitude indicator, the artificial horizon that showed their orientation relative to the Earth. "This is your best friend right now. It doesn't care about visibility or weather or how scared you are. It just tells you whether you're straight and level or not." "How do you stay calm when you can't see anything?" "Practice, repetition, flying through enough storms that your nervous system stops treating them as emergencies and starts treating them as just another set of variables to manage." Then she paused, then added, "And accepting that being nervous is okay. Fear keeps you sharp as long as you don't let it control your decisions." The terrain below them, invisible in the darkness and rain, rose steadily. Sarah monitored their altitude carefully, adjusting to maintain safe clearance above the mountains while staying low enough to avoid the worst of the weather at higher altitudes. It was a delicate balance, and one wrong judgment could turn the helicopter into debris scattered across a mountainside. "Coming up on the southern ridgeline," Vaughn announced, reading from the GPS display. "Should be about 2 miles ahead." "Good copy. Start scanning for any breaks in the weather. We need to identify that passage I mentioned." They climbed, the helicopter's engines working harder as they fought against the thinner air at altitude. 7,000 feet, 7,500 feet, 8,000 feet. Sarah felt the subtle changes in how the aircraft responded, the way the controls felt slightly more sluggish as air density decreased. "I've got something," Vaughn said suddenly. "Bearing 045, looks like a gap in the radar returns. Could be your passage." Sarah adjusted their heading, peering through the rain-streaked windscreen. For a moment, she saw nothing but gray darkness. Then, there, a slightly lighter patch in the gloom, a place where the clouds thinned just enough to suggest an opening. "That's it. Good eye, Lieutenant." She descended slightly, aiming for the passage with the precision that came from thousands of hours of mountain flying. The ridges rose on either side of them, massive stone walls that appeared as darker shapes against the dark sky. They were committed now, too far into the passage to turn around, with terrain rising behind them and an uncertain path ahead. "Clearance is getting tight," Vaughn observed, his voice steady despite the stress. "I know. Watch our airspeed. If I'm focusing on navigation, I need you monitoring our performance parameters." The passage narrowed further. Sarah made constant small adjustments, responding to wind that tried to push them toward the rock walls, maintaining just enough altitude to clear the rising terrain ahead while staying low enough to keep some visual reference to the ground.
A sudden downdraft hit them, shoving the helicopter downward with brutal force. Sarah countered immediately, increasing collective pitch to arrest their descent. The engines surged, turbines screaming as they poured power into the rotor system. "Altitude," Vaughn called out, following the crew resource management protocol. 6,800 feet and descending. "I've got it," Sarah replied calmly, her hands making the precise inputs needed to stabilize their altitude. The downdraft passed, replaced by calmer air. "Nice call, Lieutenant. That's exactly what I need from you." They cleared the passage and emerged into the objective valley system. The clouds here were lower, visibility was worse, but Sarah could feel the terrain around her even when she couldn't see it. The way the wind moved told her where the ridges were. The subtle changes in how the helicopter responded told her about air density and altitude. This was the flying that most people never saw, never understood.
Not the glamorous display flying at air shows, not the dramatic combat maneuvers from movies. This was the grinding, demanding work of keeping a complex machine flying through horrible conditions while making decisions that balanced mission requirements against crew safety. Viper 2-1, this is Rescue 1, Sarah keyed the radio, reaching out to the patrol they were trying to save. We're approximately 8 miles from your position, approaching from the south. What's your situation? The response came back fragmented by static and background noise. Rescue 1, Viper 2-1, taking sustained fire, 3 critical casualties, running low on ammunition. Don't know how much longer we can hold this position. Viper 2-1, understand you're in extremis. We're coming. Hold on. She increased their airspeed, pushing the helicopter faster through the deteriorating weather. Time had become the enemy now, measured in the steady bleeding out of wounded soldiers who might not survive another 10 minutes. "Ma'am," Vaughn said quietly, "according to our tactical display, we're going to pass within range of suspected enemy positions on this approach. I know, but they're not expecting us from this direction. We'll be through their potential engagement zone before they can react. And if they do react, then our gun-dunners earn their pay, and we fly fast and low enough that we're not an easy target." She switched to the crew intercom. "Guns, did you copy that?" "Roger, ma'am." The voice belonged to Sergeant Martinez, the senior gun-dunner. "We're scanning for threats. If they light us up, we'll suppress." Sarah appreciated the confidence in his voice. Martinez had been flying these missions for 5 years, had seen more combat than most infantrymen. He knew how to read a tactical situation, knew when to shoot and when to hold fire. The terrain funneled them toward the landing zone now, the valley narrowing as they approached the coordinates where Viper 2-1 was pinned down. Sarah descended carefully, trading altitude for the ability to see the ground, to identify the exact location where they'd need to land. "I've got tracers," Vaughn announced. 9 o'clock, low. Sarah glanced left and saw them, bright streaks of light arcing through the darkness, the distinctive signature of enemy weapons firing at targets they probably couldn't see clearly. The firefight was less than a mile ahead now. "Rescue 1, Viper 2-1, be advised you're approaching a hot LZ. We're taking fire from multiple positions." "Rescue 1, Viper 2-1 copies. Can you mark your position?" "Strobes are out. Can't risk giving away our exact location. We're in a shallow depression on the valley floor, approximately 100 meters south of the main trail." Sarah processed this information rapidly, landing in an unmarked zone, in darkness, in bad weather, while under fire. The kind of mission that existed right on the edge of what was possible, where the margin for error was measured in inches and seconds. "Lieutenant, I need you on the searchlight. We're going to do a single pass to identify the LZ, then come around for landing. One shot at this. We can't afford to circle looking for them." "Roger, ma'am. Standing by on the searchlight." They closed on the objective. Sarah could see muzzle flashes now, the distinctive pattern of friendly weapons firing in controlled bursts, different from the less disciplined enemy fire. She used these visual cues to build a mental picture of the battlefield, identifying where threats were positioned, where her people were fighting. "Searchlight on," Vaughn called, and suddenly a brilliant white beam stabbed out from beneath the helicopter, illuminating the ground below in harsh detail. There, Sarah spotted them immediately, a tight cluster of soldiers in a defensive position, several forms lying motionless that she knew were casualties waiting for extraction. She committed the image to memory in the 2 seconds before she ordered the light turned off. "Light out, we've got them, coming around for landing approach." She banked the helicopter hard, using the terrain to mask their position as she maneuvered for the final approach. This was the most dangerous phase, committed to landing, moving slowly, presenting an easy target for anyone with a weapon. "Guns, watch for RPGs," she announced over the intercom. "That's what'll kill us fastest." "Roger, ma'am, scanning."
Sarah lined up on the landing zone, fighting the wind and the rain and the darkness.
The helicopter descended in a controlled hover, her right hand making constant adjustments on the cyclic, her left hand on the collective managing power, her feet working the pedals to keep them aligned with the wind. 60 feet, Vaughn called, reading the radar altimeter. 50. 40. Rounds snapped past the aircraft, the distinctive crack of bullets breaking the sound barrier close enough to hear over the rotor noise. Sarah didn't flinch, didn't jerk the controls. Any sudden movement now could destabilize the hover and send them crashing into the ground. "Taking fire from the north ridge," Martinez called from the right door. His M240 machine gun opened up, sending controlled bursts toward muzzle flashes. The tracers arced out into the darkness, seeking targets that represented threats to their survival. 30 feet. 20. The helicopter shuddered as a round struck somewhere in the fuselage, a sharp metallic impact that Sarah felt through the airframe. Warning lights stayed dark. Systems remained green. Whatever they'd hit wasn't critical. Not yet. 10 feet. 5. The skids touched ground with a gentle bump, and Sarah immediately reduced collective pitch to settle the aircraft's weight fully on the landing zone. "We're down," she announced over all frequencies. "Viper 2-1, load your casualties. Move fast. We're not going to be here long." The scene outside devolved into controlled chaos. Soldiers appeared out of the darkness, carrying and dragging wounded men toward the helicopter. The medical team jumped out to assist, working with practiced efficiency, even as rounds continued to snap overhead. Sarah held the hover, not quite on the ground, not quite airborne, ready to lift immediately if the tactical situation demanded it. Her eyes scanned the instrument panel constantly, checking for any indication of damage, any warning that their brief time on the ground had compromised the helicopter's ability to fly. "Loading first casualty," the crew chief called. Through the windscreen, Sarah could see the soldiers working in the glow of red tactical lights. One man was carried on a stretcher, his face pale even in the dim illumination. Others hobbled aboard under their own power, wounded but mobile. The patrol's commanding officer stood at the perimeter, still firing his rifle toward enemy positions, covering his man as they loaded. "RPG!" Martinez screamed, and Sarah's hands moved before her conscious mind finished processing the warning. She lifted the collective sharply, breaking contact with the ground and climbing away from the landing zone in a climbing right turn. The rocket-propelled grenade passed through the space they'd occupied 2 seconds earlier, impacting the ground in a flash of light and a pressure wave Sarah felt through the airframe. "Second casualty loaded," the crew chief called, seemingly unbothered by the near miss. "Loading third." Sarah brought them back to a hover, repositioning slightly to put terrain between the helicopter and the ridge where that RPG had come from. The soldier who'd fired it was either reloading or repositioning, giving them precious seconds. "Last man!" someone shouted from the back. The patrol commander sprinted toward the helicopter, the last soldier to board, still firing as he ran. He dove through the open door as another burst of enemy fire kicked up dirt where he'd been standing. "Go, go, go!" the crew chief yelled. Sarah didn't need the encouragement. She was already climbing, transitioning from hover to forward flight, building airspeed to get them out of the immediate threat zone. The helicopter accelerated away from the landing zone, the mountain walls rising around them as she aimed for the passage that would take them back to safety. More rounds hit the aircraft. She felt the impacts, heard the sharp pings of metal on metal. But the warning lights stayed dark, the gauges remained in their normal ranges, and the helicopter kept flying. "Status check," she called over the intercom. "Anyone hit?" "Crew's good," Martinez reported. "Aircraft took some hits, but nothing that stopped us." "Medical, how are the casualties?" "Working them now, ma'am." The lead medic's voice was tight with concentration. "Got 2 critical, 1 urgent. We need to get them to a trauma center fast." "Roger that. ATA to base is 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Sarah climbed higher, gaining altitude to clear the terrain between them and home. 20 minutes for the medics to keep 3 soldiers alive. 20 minutes for her to fly through weather that hadn't improved, threading through mountain valleys in darkness and rain.
She could do this. She'd done harder missions before, though she'd never admit it to anyone who might be listening. "Rescue 1, this is Echo 7, the voice from base operations crackled in her headset. "We monitored your radio traffic. Understand you've extracted all casualties and are en route home?" "Affirmative, Echo 7. 5 wounded personnel on board, 3 critical. We'll need trauma teams standing by." "Roger, Rescue 1. Medical is being notified now. What's your status? We heard reports of ground fire." "We took some hits, but the aircraft is flying normally. We'll need maintenance to do a thorough inspection once we're on deck, but I'm not declaring an emergency at this time." "Copy, Rescue 1. You're cleared direct to base. Priority handling. Weather at your destination is—" "Static," interrupted the transmission, then cleared. "Ceiling now 2,000 feet. Visibility 2 miles in rain. Winds 280 at 22, gusting to 31. Sarah processed the weather report. Worse than when they'd departed, but still within her capabilities. Getting on the ground would require precision, but that's what they paid her for. Beside her, Vaughn had been silent since they'd left the landing zone, his attention fixed on the instruments and the tactical display. Now he spoke, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been respect. "Ma'am, that was— I've never seen anyone fly like that. The way you positioned us during the landing, the way you anticipated that RPG. Training and experience, Lieutenant. Keep flying long enough and you'll develop the same instincts. I don't know if I'll ever be that calm under fire. You were calm tonight. You called out altitudes perfectly, monitored our systems, backed me up exactly the way I needed. That's what crew coordination looks like. We did this together." In the back of the helicopter, the medics worked frantically on the casualties. I could hear fragments of their communication, calls for blood pressure, requests for equipment, the steady litany of medical intervention that marked the boundary between life and death. One of the wounded soldiers was talking, his voice weak but audible over the intercom. "I thought we were done for. Didn't think anyone could get in there." "Easy, soldier. You're safe now. We're taking you home." "Who's flying? I wanna thank them." Sarah keyed her mic before the medic could respond. "Focus on staying with us, soldier. You can thank me when you're out of surgery, and I can buy you a beer." A weak laugh from the back. "Roger that, ma'am." The flight back passed in relative calm. They'd left the worst of the combat behind, though the weather remained challenging. Sarah navigated using a combination of GPS, terrain awareness, and the mental map she'd built over years of flying these mountains. She thought about what waited for her at the base, questions about why she'd changed the route, a debrief that would analyze every decision she'd made, possibly criticism from people who thought she'd taken unnecessary risks or deviated from standard procedures. But 5 soldiers who would have died tonight were alive. Whatever judgment came afterwards, that fact would remain unchanged. "Rescue 1, Echo 7, we have you on radar. You're cleared for straight-in approach to Pad 2. Emergency services are standing by. Trauma teams are ready." "Rescue 1 copies. Beginning descent." The base appeared ahead, a cluster of lights fighting against the rain and darkness. Sarah lined up on the approach path, reducing airspeed and beginning the transition from forward flight to hover. The landing was textbook perfect, smooth, controlled, exactly centered on the designated pad. The moment the skids touched concrete, the medical teams were rushing forward with stretchers and equipment. "You're cleared to shut down," the tower controller said. "Nice work tonight, Rescue 1. "Thanks, Tower. Rescue 1 shutting down." Sarah ran through the shutdown checklist with the same methodical precision she'd used for every other phase of the flight. Engines spooled down, rotors gradually slowed their rotation, systems powered off one by one until the helicopter sat silent and still. She sat in the left seat for a moment after everything was secured, feeling the adrenaline begin to ebb. Her hands were steady, they always were during missions, but she knew they'd probably shake later when the stress chemicals worked their way out of her system. Vaughn removed his helmet, running a hand through sweat-damlened hair. "Ma'am, I just want to say—"
You did good work tonight, Lieutenant. Your altitude calls were perfect. Your navigation support was exactly what I needed, and you stayed calm when it got hot. That's all I ask from a co-pilot. I appreciate that. Now let's go debrief so these maintenance folks can inspect the bird and patch up whatever holes we brought back.
The debriefing lasted 2 hours. Sarah walked the operations staff through every decision, why she'd chosen the southern route, how she'd navigated through the passage, what had informed her tactical approach to the landing zone. She answered questions honestly and thoroughly, neither minimizing the risks they'd faced nor exaggerating her own role. Major Williams listened carefully, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly letting her talk. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. "Captain Chen, that was exceptional flying. You made calls tonight that saved lives, both the casualties we extracted and your own crew. The route you chose was unconventional, but it was the right call given the tactical situation." "Thank you, sir." However, Williams paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your decision to take command of this mission, knowing your complicated status here, has opened up questions that will need to be addressed. The battalion commander is going to want a full review." "I understand, sir. I'm prepared to justify every decision I made." "I'm not talking about justifying your flight performance. I'm talking about the circumstances that brought you to this base in the first place. Those questions haven't gone away. If anything, tonight's success is going to make people wonder why you weren't flying missions all along." Sarah absorbed this information without visible reaction. She'd known this conversation was coming from the moment she'd volunteered for the mission. "Sir, with respect, the only question that should matter is whether I performed my duties competently and brought everyone home safely, which I did." "Agreed, but we both know the military doesn't always work that way. Perception matters, narrative matters, and the narrative around you has been problematic." Before Sarah could respond, Rodriguez stuck his head into the debriefing room. "Major, got a minute? Need to show you something about the aircraft." They followed the crew chief out to the maintenance hangar where the helicopter sat under bright lights, surrounded by technicians examining every inch of the airframe. Rodriguez led them to the right side of the aircraft and pointed. "See these holes? 7 of them, clustered in a tight pattern. Small arms fire, probably 7.62 millimeter. They punched through the thin skin here, but missed every critical system. 6 inches to the left, and they would have shredded the hydraulic lines. 8 inches higher, and they would have hit the transmission. But Captain Chen positioned the aircraft during that landing so the enemy shooters had the worst possible angle. They could hit us, but they couldn't hit anything that mattered." Williams examined the bullet holes, then looked at Sarah. "Was that deliberate, the way you positioned during the landing?" "Yes, sir. I used the terrain to mask our vulnerable areas and presented the most heavily armored sections to the known tactical axis." Rodriguez continued his tour, pointing out 2 more impact sites. "Here and here, more rounds that hit nothing critical. And this one," he indicated a scorched area near the tail. "This was close. An RPG passed maybe 2 meters from the tail rotor. Any closer and we would have lost directional control." The crew chief called the warning. Sarah reacted based on his call. That's crew coordination working the way it's supposed to. They completed the walk-around inspection, cataloging the damage. 12 bullet holes, 1 near miss from an RPG, and some minor stress to components that had been pushed hard during the aggressive maneuvering. Nothing that couldn't be repaired in a few days. "She'll fly again," Rodriguez declared. "Might be the luckiest bird on this base." "Or the best flown," Williams suggested. Back in the operations center, Sarah completed the last of her paperwork. Her hand cramped slightly from writing. Digital systems were good, but the military still required actual signatures on certain forms. As she signed the final sheet, Vaughn approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this, ma'am." "Thanks, Lieutenant." She accepted the cup gratefully, the warmth seeping into hands that had been gripping flight controls tightly for the past 2 hours. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Vaughn spoke again. "Can I ask you something about what happened before, at your last assignment?" Sarah considered shutting down the question, maintaining the wall she'd built around that part of her past. But something about tonight, about having flown a successful mission, about having proven herself again, made her willing to at least acknowledge the elephant in the room. "You can ask. I might not answer. People say you froze, that you made a critical error that endangered your crew, but after flying with you tonight, I can't reconcile that story with the pilot I saw. So what really happened?" Sarah stared into her coffee, watching the steam rise and disappear. What really happened was complicated. We were flying a resupply mission in contested airspace. Intelligence said the route was cold, but intelligence was wrong. We took fire from multiple positions, heavy stuff, not just small arms. My co-pilot wanted to punch out, abort the mission, head for safety. But you didn't. No, because I looked at the tactical situation and realized that if we aborted, we'd be flying directly into another ambush they had set up on our exit route. They were trying to funnel us into a kill zone. So I made a call. Instead of running, we pushed through, took fire the whole way, but we completed the mission and got everyone home. That sounds like good decision-making, not an error. The problem was that my co-pilot filed a report saying I'd disregarded his input and put the crew at unnecessary risk. He claimed I'd frozen during the initial contact and then made an irrational decision that happened to work out by luck rather than skill.
Vaughn's expression darkened. That's one perspective on what happened. The investigation couldn't definitively prove who was right because the only evidence was conflicting testimony from the crew. Some people backed my version, some backed his. In the absence of clear proof, Command decided the safest thing was to transfer me somewhere I couldn't hurt anyone if the second version was true. But you know you were right. I know I made the best decision I could with the information I had. Whether that makes me right or just lucky, she shrugged. Depends on who you ask. They fell silent again. In the background, the operations center continued its work, tracking other missions, updating weather forecasts, managing the endless flow of information that kept a military base functioning. Finally, Vaughn spoke. "For what it's worth, ma'am, after tonight, I know which version I believe." Sarah smiled faintly. "Tonight was one mission, Lieutenant, one data point. Don't let it bias you too strongly. One really good data point, though." Over the next several days, Sarah noticed subtle shifts in how people interacted with her. The young pilots who'd previously avoided eye contact now nodded respectfully when they passed. The operations staff included her in planning discussions without hesitation. Even the senior aviators, the ones who'd been most skeptical, seemed to reassess their positions. But the most significant change came from an unexpected source. 4 days after the mission, Sarah was in the maintenance hangar helping Rodriguez's team with an inspection when Major Williams found her. "Captain Chen, got a minute?" She set down the torque wrench she'd been using and wiped her hands on a rag. "Yes, sir. Battalion commander wants to see you. 1600 hours. Sarah checked her watch. That gave her 40 minutes to clean up and get to the headquarters building. "Any indication what this is about, sir?" "Just said he wanted to talk about your flight performance and your status here." Williams' expression was carefully neutral. "I'll be there too, sir." "Understood, sir. I'll be there." At precisely 1600 hours, Sarah stood outside the battalion commander's office, her uniform immaculate, her mind prepared for whatever came next. She'd been through enough military bureaucracy to know that meetings like this could go in any direction. The door opened, and Williams gestured her inside. Major Briggs sat behind his desk, a lean man in his mid-40s with the weathered look of someone who'd spent most of his career in operational units. "Captain Chen, have a seat." She sat, maintaining proper military bearing without being stiff. Briggs studied her for a moment before speaking. "I've read the after-action reports from your mission.
I've talked to your co-pilot, your crew, the soldiers you extracted, and the medical personnel who treated the casualties. I've also reviewed the maintenance reports on the aircraft damage and had a long conversation with Chief Rodriguez about how that helicopter was flown. Sarah waited, knowing that whatever came next would set the tone for the rest of her time at this base. The consensus, Briggs continued, is that you flew one of the best combat rescue missions this battalion has seen in the past 2 years. Your tactical decision-making was sound, your crew management was exemplary, and your technical flying skills were outstanding. Thank you, sir. Which brings me to a question I should have asked 3 months ago when you arrived here. What actually happened at your previous assignment? Sarah took a breath and told him. The same story she'd told Vaughn, but with more detail, more context. She explained the tactical situation, the decision she'd made, the aftermath that had followed. She didn't editorialize or try to paint herself as a victim. She just laid out the facts as she had experienced them. When she finished, Briggs leaned back in his chair. Why didn't you fight this harder, demand a formal investigation, push back against the narrative? Sir, I did request a formal investigation. One was conducted. It was inconclusive because there wasn't enough objective evidence to definitively support either version of events. At that point, I could either accept the transfer and continue my career, or I could become the officer who complained endlessly about being wronged. I chose to accept and move forward. Even though it meant being sidelined, having your reputation damaged? Reputation is earned through performance, sir, not through what people say about you, but through what you actually do. I figured eventually I'd get another chance to demonstrate what I'm capable of. Briggs nodded slowly. Well, you got that chance 4 nights ago, and you made the most of it. He pulled a file folder from his desk drawer. I'm reassigning you to full operational flying status, effective immediately. You'll join the primary rotation for all mission types. I'm also recommending you for the Air Medal for your actions during that rescue.
Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd almost forgotten it was there. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. I know you won't, because you've already proven what you can do when it matters most. He stood, extending his hand. Welcome back to flying status, Captain. We're lucky to have you. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. Sarah flew regular missions, combat rescues, supply muns, medical evacuations, all the varied work that kept helicopters busy in a war zone. She flew with different co-pilots, trained junior aviators, and gradually rebuilt her reputation through consistent performance. The rumors didn't disappear entirely. Some people still believed the old stories, still viewed her with suspicion, but they became background noise, easy to ignore when measured against the tangible evidence of successful missions and professional competence. One evening, she found herself in the pilot's lounge with a mixed group of aviators, swapping stories over cards and bad coffee. Someone brought up a close call they'd had during a recent mission, and the conversation drifted into the kind of shop talk that pilots engage in, technical discussions of decisions made, alternatives considered, lessons learned. Lieutenant Reeves, who'd recently recovered from the flu that had kept her grounded during Sarah's first big mission, turned to Sarah. Captain, you ever have one of those moments where you're absolutely certain you're about to die, but somehow you pull through? Sarah thought about it. Few times. Most memorable was probably my second deployment. We were extracting wounded from a small outpost that was being overrun. Took an RPG through the cabin, didn't explode, just punched straight through and out the other side. If it had detonated, we would have all been dead. What did you do? Kept flying, completed the extraction, got everyone home, then spent about an hour throwing up once we were safely on the ground. The group laughed, recognizing the honesty. This wasn't bravado or false heroism. This was the real experience of combat aviation, moments of sheer terror, followed by the job still needing to be done. The thing about this job, Sarah continued, is that the aircraft doesn't care how scared you are. The wounded don't care if you're nervous. They just need you to fly well enough to get them to medical care.
So you push the fear aside, you focus on the technical tasks, and you trust your training. That's easy to say, a young warrant officer named Kim observed. Harder to actually do. It absolutely is, and anyone who tells you they're never scared is either lying or too stupid to recognize danger. Sarah met his eyes directly. Being scared doesn't make you a bad pilot. Letting fear control your decisions, that's what'll get people killed. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Sarah noticed the way the younger pilots listened when she spoke now, not with the skepticism she'd faced when she first arrived, but with the respect given to someone who'd proven their knowledge through experience. Late that night, after the card game broke up and most people had headed for their quarters, Sarah found herself alone on the operations center observation deck. The base stretched out below her, a small constellation of lights in a vast darkness. Helicopters sat on their pads ready for the next mission. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the generator's steady hum, the mechanical heartbeat that kept everything running. Her grandmother's compass was in her hand, though she didn't remember pulling it out. The metal caught the faint light, the engraving still barely readable after all these years. True north isn't always where you're told to look. Amira appeared beside her, moving quietly enough that Sarah didn't notice until the interpreter spoke. "You are thinking deep thoughts, Captain." "Just reflecting. It's been an interesting few weeks. You have proven what I knew the first time we spoke, that you are patient like water, and that water always finds its way." Sarah smiled. "Water also evaporates sometimes, disappears and has to start over somewhere else. But it does not cease to exist, it simply changes form." Amira leaned against the railing, her gaze following the same distant horizon Sarah had been watching. "You have changed form many times, I think, each time learning, adapting." "Had to, didn't have much choice." "There is always choice. You could have become bitter, could have given up flying, taken an administrative position, let the rumors define who you became. Instead, you remained ready, remained capable. When the moment came, you were not diminished by your time in shadows." "I don't know if I'd call it remaining ready, more like I didn't know how to stop being a pilot when nobody wanted me to fly." "That's what ready means, Captain. Not preparing for a specific moment, but being prepared for any moment. You did not know when your chance would come, but when it did, you were the person needed for that time."
They stood in comfortable silence, two people who understood what it meant to exist in the spaces between cultures, between roles, between who others thought you were and who you actually were. "The soldiers you saved," Amira said eventually, "they ask about you." Sarah turned to her. "They ask about me?" "They want to know who was flying that night, want to thank you properly. One of them, the sergeant who was last aboard, he has been telling everyone that you were the best pilot he has ever seen. His words carry weight among the infantry." "I was just doing my job." "Yes, but you did it extraordinarily well, at a time when many others would have failed or refused to try." Amira smiled. "This is worth something even if you do not seek recognition for it." Sarah considered this. Recognition had been a complicated thing in her career, sometimes given for accomplishments that felt routine, sometimes withheld for achievements that felt significant. She'd learned not to base her self-worth on external validation, but she couldn't deny that it felt good to be appreciated. "Tell them I said they're welcome, and that any pilot in this unit would have done the same thing." "Perhaps, but you were the one who did it." After Amira left, Sarah remained on the observation deck, watching the night slowly give way to the first hints of dawn. She thought about the path that had brought her here, the initial success, the sudden fall, the long climb back to credibility. It had been painful, isolating, often infuriating. But it had also taught her things she might not have learned otherwise. Patience, as Amira said, humility, the ability to derive satisfaction from work itself rather than from recognition for work.
the understanding that competence was its own reward, independent of whether others acknowledged it. Her radio crackled. "Captain Chen, this is operations. We have a priority tasking, medical evacuation in Sector 7. Weather is marginal, requesting your availability." Sarah keyed her mic. "Operations, Captain Chen, I'm available. Give me 5 minutes to grab my gear." "Roger, Captain. Bird is being pre-flighted now. Thanks for the quick response." She headed for the ready room, her stride purposeful and steady. There was work to be done, soldiers who needed help, a helicopter that needed flying. Everything else, the politics, the rumors, the complicated history, faded into irrelevance when measured against the simple clarity of a mission. This was who she was, not despite everything that had happened, but because of it. The struggles had refined her, stripped away the ego and pretense, left only the essential core of someone who knew how to fly and was willing to do it when others couldn't or wouldn't. Her grandmother's compass stayed in her pocket, a reminder that navigation required patience, that true north wasn't always obvious, that sometimes the path forward meant trusting your own instruments when everyone else said they were wrong. Sarah Chen climbed into the left seat of another helicopter, began another pre-flight checklist, prepared for another mission into difficult conditions. She did it without fanfare, without seeking attention, only with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned that the work mattered more than the recognition. Epilogue: the measure of courage. 6 months later, the award ceremony was brief and professional. Sarah stood at attention while Lieutenant Colonel Briggs pinned the Air Medal to her uniform, reading the citation that described her actions during the rescue mission in careful, official language. The assembled personnel, a mix of aviators, ground troops, and support staff, applauded politely. Among them were the 5 soldiers she'd extracted that night, all recovered from their wounds, all standing a little straighter as they watched the recognition being given to the pilot who'd saved their lives. After the ceremony, as people dispersed back to their regular duties, Sergeant First Class Morrison, the patrol leader who was last to board the helicopter, approached Sarah. "Ma'am, can I have a moment?" "Of course, Sergeant." "I wanted to properly thank you for what you did. We'd made peace with dying in that valley, and then you showed up, flying through impossible conditions that should have kept everyone grounded, and you got us out. I owe you my life." Sarah met his eyes directly. "You don't owe me anything, Sergeant. You were doing your job in that valley. I was doing mine. The only difference is you had a helicopter and you didn't." "With respect, ma'am, there's a big difference between having a helicopter and knowing how to fly it the way you did. Not every pilot would have made it through that weather. Not every pilot would have chosen the route you took. You made decisions that saved lives, ours and your crew's." "I had a good crew, and I had training. That's what saw us through." Morrison smiled slightly. "You're not going to take credit for this, are you?" "Credit belongs to everyone who made that mission successful. The crew, the medics, the ground team, even the soldiers who held that perimeter while we loaded. I just moved the helicopter from point A to point B." "You're something else, Captain." Morrison extended his hand. "If I'm ever in trouble again, I hope you're the one flying." They shook hands, and then he rejoined his unit. Sarah watched him go, feeling a complex mixture of emotions: pride in having done her job well, gratitude that everyone survived, awareness that luck had played as much a role as skill. Rodriguez found her standing alone near the hangar, looking at the helicopter she'd flown that night, now fully repaired, the bullet holes patched, the battle damage erased. "Heard you deflected all the credit again," he observed. "Because it's true, one person doesn't execute a mission like that alone." "True, but one person makes the decisions that determine whether everyone comes home or not. That was you, Captain." "Captain, can I ask you something? You've been doing this longer than almost anyone on this base. How do you measure success in this job?" "Used to, I measured it in flight hours, in missions completed, in aircraft maintained. Thought success was about the numbers, how many sorties, how many parts replaced, how many inspections passed." "And now?" Now I measure it in faces. The faces of people who came home because we did our jobs right. Your crew that night, they came home. Those 5 soldiers, they came home. Their families don't have to get the worst notification in the world. That's success. That's what all the training and maintenance and procedures exist to accomplish. Even when nobody knows about it, when there's no recognition? Especially then, because that means you're doing it for the right reasons, not for medals or promotions or reputation, but because the work itself matters.
It was perhaps the most profound thing Sarah had heard Rodriguez say in the 6 months she'd known him. Coming from someone else, it might have sounded like empty philosophy. Coming from him, a career maintainer who'd kept aircraft flying through 2 decades of conflict, it carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Thanks, Chief. I needed to hear that. Figured you might. You're the type who's hard on yourself, keeps questioning whether you're doing enough. But you are. You're doing exactly what needs to be done, exactly the way it needs to be done. That's all any of us can do. Later that evening, Sarah sat in her quarters writing an email to her grandmother. The old woman was in her 90s now, living in a retirement community in Oregon, but her mind was sharp, and she still asked detailed questions about Sarah's work. Dear Graham, they gave me a medal today, air medal, for the mission I told you about, the one where we extracted those soldiers in bad weather. The citation says I displayed exceptional skill and courage under fire. I suppose that's technically accurate, though it feels strange to think of myself that way. I keep thinking about what you told me when I was struggling after the investigation at my last unit. You said that character is what you do when nobody's watching, when there's no recognition or reward, when the only measure is whether you can look yourself in the mirror afterward. I spent 3 months being invisible here, 3 months where people treated me like I was broken, unreliable, someone to be worked around rather than worked with. And you know what? It was the best thing that could have happened to me. It stripped away all the ego, all the need for external validation. It forced me to figure out who I was as a pilot when nobody was watching, when no accolades or promotions or pats on the back. Just the work, just the flying, just the daily choice to stay ready even when nobody wanted me to fly. Your compass has been with me through all of it, every mission, every difficult moment, every time I questioned whether I should give up. That inscription you had engraved, true north isn't always where you're told to look. It's become more than words. It's become a philosophy. The military told me I should look one direction. My career trajectory said I should look another. The rumors and whispers suggested I should probably just give up. But your compass reminded me to trust my own navigation, to find true north using my own instruments. I'm not saying I've arrived at some perfect destination. I'm still figuring things out, still learning, still making mistakes. But I think I'm pointed in the right direction now. And when the moment came that tested everything I'd learned, I was ready. Not because I'd been preparing for that specific moment, but because I'd never stopped being prepared for any moment. Thank you for teaching me that, for giving me a compass that pointed towards something more important than success or recognition or vindication. You taught me to point toward competence, integrity, and service. Everything else is just details. Love, Sarah. She sent the email and sat back, feeling a sense of peace that had been elusive for a long time. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, new opportunities to do the work that mattered. But tonight she could rest in the knowledge that she'd found her way back, not to where she'd been before, but to somewhere better. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Lieutenant Vaughn standing there, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, sorry to bother you. I know it's late." "No bother, Lieutenant. What's up?" "I just wanted to say, what you did for me during that mission, the way you taught me while we were flying, the way you trusted me to back you up even though I was terrified and inexperienced, that meant something." Sarah smiled. "You earned that trust, Lieutenant. You stayed calm, you did your job, you spoke up when you needed to. That's all I ask from a co-pilot." "I've been thinking about what you said about staying ready when nobody's watching, about doing the work for its own sake rather than for recognition." He paused, choosing his words carefully.
I want to be that kind of pilot, not the kind who's chasing medals or promotions, but the kind who's just really, really good at the job, the kind people want flying when things get bad. Then keep flying, keep learning, keep pushing yourself to be better than you were yesterday. The rest will take care of itself. Will you keep teaching me? I mean, when we fly together? Every mission is a teaching opportunity, Lieutenant, for both of us. I learn something new every time I fly. That never stops. Vaughn nodded, looking relieved. Thank you, ma'am, and congratulations on the medal. You earned it.
After he left, Sarah returned to her desk and pulled out her grandmother's compass one more time. The metal was cool now, the engraving catching the light from her desk lamp. She traced the words with her finger, feeling the grooves worn smooth by decades of handling. True north isn't always where you're told to look. She understood that now in a way she hadn't when her grandmother first gave her the compass. True north wasn't about following the path others laid out for you. It wasn't about living up to expectations or conforming to narratives. It was about finding your own authentic direction and having the courage to follow it, even when everyone else said you were lost. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from one of the soldiers she'd rescued, Specialist Chen, no relation, though they'd joked about it at the ceremony. Captain, my sister graduates from flight school next month. She wants to be a helicopter pilot. Can I tell her about you, about what real military aviation looks like? Sarah typed her response. Tell her it's the hardest job she'll ever love. Tell her she'll be scared sometimes, exhausted often, and questioned constantly. Tell her she'll save lives she'll never know about and fly missions that will never make the news. Tell her if she can find satisfaction in doing difficult work well, regardless of recognition, then she should absolutely do it. And tell her I said welcome to the profession. The response came back quickly. Thank you, ma'am. She's going to love hearing that. Sarah set down her phone and looked around her quarters. They were sparse, functional. A bed, a desk, a small bookshelf, a locker for her gear. No decorations beyond a single framed photo of her grandmother in her Navy nurse uniform, taken somewhere in the South China Sea in 1969. Two women, separated by 50 years and different wars, connected by the understanding that service meant showing up when it was hard, staying calm when others panicked, and finding purpose in work that often went unrecognized. Her grandmother had navigated hospital ships through typhoons, had held the hands of dying young men, had maintained her composure through horrors that would have broken most people. She'd done it without medals, without recognition, without anyone outside her immediate circle ever knowing her name. But the men she'd saved had known. The families who got their sons and husbands back had known. That had been enough for her. And it was enough for Sarah, too. She changed into her PT gear and headed out for a late-night run around the base perimeter. The air was cool, the sky clear for once, stars visible between scattered clouds. Her feet found their rhythm on the packed dirt path. Her breathing settled into the steady pattern of someone who'd run thousands of miles over the years. Other soldiers passed her going the opposite direction. Some nodded, some saluted, some just kept running. A few months ago, most of them wouldn't have acknowledged her at all. Now they did, because word had spread about the pilot who flew through hell to bring people home. But Sarah knew that reputation was fragile, that it had to be maintained through consistent performance, that one bad mission could erase all the goodwill she'd built. That was fine. She wasn't flying for reputation. She was flying because it was what she knew how to do, what she'd trained for, what gave her life purpose and meaning. The path took her past the flight line, where helicopters sat in silent rows, waiting for tomorrow's missions. She paused at the fence, looking at the aircraft that had become such a central part of her identity.
Machines of metal and composite, complex assemblies of engineering that somehow translated human decisions into controlled flight. They were beautiful in their functionality, elegant in their purpose, and she was grateful every day that she got to fly them. Captain Chen. She turned to find Amira approaching, wrapped in a heavy jacket against the cool night air. "Amira, you're up late." "As are you. I saw you running and thought I would walk with you, if you do not mind." "Not at all. I was just finishing up." They walked together along the perimeter, two women who'd found unexpected friendship in a war zone. "You seem more at peace," Amira observed, "since the ceremony, since being recognized for what you did." "I think I am, not because of the recognition exactly, more because I've made peace with the path that brought me here. The struggle, the doubt, the isolation, all of it was necessary. It stripped away everything except what was essential." "And what is essential?" "I thought about that. Competence, integrity, the willingness to do difficult work because it needs to be done, not because it'll be rewarded. Those things are essential. Everything else is just noise." "This is wisdom," Amira said quietly. "Many people never learn this. They spend their whole lives chasing recognition, approval, validation from others. They never find the peace that comes from knowing your own worth, independent of what others think. My grandmother taught me that, though I had to learn it the hard way. The hard way is often the only way such lessons truly sink in. Easy knowledge is easily forgotten, but wisdom earned through struggle, that stays with you."
They completed another lap around the perimeter before Amira excused herself to return to the interpreter's quarters. Sarah continued alone, her thoughts drifting across the months she'd spent at this base, the journey from isolation to acceptance, from doubt to confidence. She thought about the young pilots who were just starting their careers, full of enthusiasm and naivety. Some would succeed quickly, advancing through the ranks with apparent ease. Others would struggle, would face setbacks, would question whether they belonged. She wanted to tell them that the struggles mattered, that the setbacks taught lessons that success never could, that the moments of doubt were opportunities to discover what you were really made of. But she knew they'd have to learn it themselves, just as she had. All she could do was lead by example, fly well, teach honestly, stay humble, be ready. The next morning brought a new mission alert. Sarah was in the operations center within 5 minutes of the call, studying the tactical situation while pulling on her flight suit. Coalition convoy hit an IED. Multiple casualties, 1 critical. Weather's good, route is relatively secure. Should be a straightforward medical evacuation. "Should be" were famous last words in military aviation, but Sarah just nodded. "Roger, sir. Who's my co-pilot?" "Lieutenant Kim. He's new, but he's been asking to fly with you." Sarah found Kim in the ready room, looking nervous and eager in equal measure. He was young, probably 23, with the kind of enthusiasm that hadn't yet been tempered by hard experience. "Ready to fly, Lieutenant?" "Yes, ma'am. I've been studying your mission reports. The way you navigated through that weather system, the tactical decisions you made, it's exactly the kind of flying I want to learn." "Good. Then today you're going to practice those skills in easier conditions. I want you to take us to the objective. I'll be monitoring, but you're going to do the flying." Kim's eyes widened. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "The only way to learn is by doing. We've got good weather and a relatively simple mission. Perfect time for you to build experience. I'll step in if needed, but I want you making the decisions." They walked to the aircraft together, Sarah pointing out details of the pre-flight inspection, explaining the subtle signs that indicated whether systems were functioning correctly. Rodriguez was already there, having pre-flighted the helicopter with his usual thoroughness. "She's ready to go, Captain. Full fuel, all systems green."
Thanks, Chief. Lieutenant Kim is going to be taking us to the objective today. This is a training mission for him. Rodriguez sized up the young pilot, then nodded. Good. Best way to learn is in the seat. Just remember, the bird tells you what she needs if you listen close enough. Kim climbed into the right seat nervously, but Sarah noticed his hands moved through the checklist with practiced precision. Good training, she thought. Now to see if he could apply it under pressure. Your aircraft, Lieutenant, Sarah announced once they were ready. Take us to the objective. Kim's voice cracked slightly on his first radio call, but he steadied and executed a smooth takeoff. Sarah monitored carefully, but kept her hands off the controls, letting him learn through doing. As they flew toward the convoy location, Sarah called out teaching points. Notice how the aircraft is responding to this headwind. You're fighting it with cyclic inputs. Try adjusting your power and letting the aircraft find its own balance. Kim made the adjustment, and the helicopter settled into smoother flight. That's much better. I was over-controlling. Common mistake. The aircraft wants to fly efficiently. Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop fighting it and let it show you what it needs. They reached the objective, and Kim executed a competent landing near the convoy. The medical evacuation proceeded smoothly. No enemy contact, no complications, just professional soldiers doing their jobs efficiently. On the flight back, with the casualties stabilized in the back, Sarah asked Kim what he'd learned. That I overthink things, he admitted. I was so worried about making mistakes that I was making them worse by second-guessing myself. That's a valuable lesson. Trust your training, trust your instincts, make decisions and commit to them rather than hesitating. Is that how you fly? With that kind of confidence?
Sarah considered her answer carefully. I fly with competence earned through experience. The confidence comes from knowing I've practiced the skills until they're reflexive, but I never assume I'm beyond making mistakes. Stay humble, stay vigilant, stay ready to learn. That's what separates good pilots from excellent ones. They landed back at base, and Kim executed his shutdown checklist with the same careful precision he'd shown throughout the mission. As they walked away from the aircraft, he turned to Sarah. "Ma'am, thank you for trusting me with that. A lot of senior pilots wouldn't let a junior guy fly the actual mission. I was a junior pilot once. Someone trusted me before I'd proven I deserved it. I'm passing that forward." Over the following months, Sarah flew dozens more missions. Some were routine medical evacuations and supply runs. Others were complex combat operations that tested every skill she possessed. She trained junior pilots, mentored struggling aviators, and became the person others turned to when missions required exceptional skill. But she never forgot what it felt like to be overlooked, to be doubted, to be dismissed. That experience had shaped her in ways that success alone never could have. It had taught her empathy for people struggling to prove themselves. It had shown her the value of competence without ego. It had revealed that the most important validation came from within, not from external recognition. 1 year after the mission that had returned her to flight status, Sarah sat in the operations center reviewing training schedules. Her role had expanded. She was now the unit's senior instructor pilot, responsible for maintaining standards and developing the next generation of aviators. Major Williams approached, a folder in his hand. "Captain Chen, got something for you." She looked up from the training schedule. "Sir?" "Orders. You're being reassigned. The Army Aviation Center wants you as an instructor. Seems your reputation has reached beyond this unit." Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. This base had been where she'd rebuilt her career, where she'd found her footing again. Leaving meant starting over in a new place with new people who might or might not know her history. But it also meant an opportunity to influence aviation training at a broader level, to ensure future pilots learned not just technical skills, but the character qualities that defined true professionals. "When do I leave, sir?" 60 days. Gives you time to finish out this training cycle and transition your responsibilities." "Understood. Thank you for the opportunity to serve here, sir. This unit gave me back something I'd lost." Williams smiled. "From where I sit, Captain, you gave this unit more than we gave you.
You set a standard. You showed people what professionalism looks like. That's going to outlast your assignment here." The next 2 months passed quickly. Sarah flew her last missions with crews she'd trained, said goodbye to people who'd become friends, packed up the sparse quarters that had been home for 15 months. On her final night at the base, Sarah stood on the observation deck one last time, looking out over the flight line. Amira joined her, as Sarah had known she would. "You are leaving," Amira said. "Not a question, just an observation. New assignment, teaching job. You will be good at this. You have learned how to teach through experience, through patience. The students will be fortunate." "I hope so. I want to give them what someone gave me, the chance to develop not just as pilots, but as people who understand what this profession really requires. Will you tell them about your struggles, about what you learned during your difficult time?" Sarah considered that. "I'll tell them what they need to hear when they need to hear it. Some lessons can't be taught, they have to be experienced. But I can help them understand that struggles don't disqualify you from success. Sometimes they're necessary preparation for it." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge as darkness deepened. Finally, Amira spoke again. "I have something for you." She pulled a small wrapped package from her pocket, a going-away gift. Sarah unwrapped it to find a compass, not old like her grandmother's, but new, beautifully crafted. On the back was an inscription in both English and Pashto. "The path forward honors the path behind." "Amira, this is... Thank you. I'll treasure this. Your grandmother's compass brought you through difficult times. This one will guide you forward. But remember, you already know how to navigate. You learned that here." The next morning, Sarah loaded her gear into a transport vehicle and took a last look at the base that had been home. Chief Rodriguez was there to see her off, along with a few of the pilots she'd trained. "You take care of yourself, Captain, and remember, aircraft maintenance matters even when you're teaching. Make sure those students understand that." "I will. Thank you, Chief, for everything."
Lieutenant Vaughn stepped forward. "Ma'am, you changed how I think about flying, about what it means to be a military aviator. I'm going to pass that forward to the people I train." "That's all I can ask, Lieutenant. Fly safe." The drive to the airfield was quiet. Sarah spent it looking at the landscape she'd come to know so well, the mountains, the valleys, the terrain that had tested and refined her skills. She was leaving, but she was taking with her lessons that would inform everything she did going forward. At the Army Aviation Center, Sarah would spend the next phase of her career teaching. She'd develop curricula that emphasized not just technical proficiency, but character development. She'd mentor struggling students who needed someone to believe in them when they didn't believe in themselves. She'd tell stories, carefully edited, lessons extracted about what combat aviation really required. And she'd keep both compasses with her. Her grandmother's worn brass compass, reminder of lessons learned through struggle, and Amira's new compass, reminder that the path forward was built on the foundation of the path behind. Years later, sitting in her office at the Aviation Center, Captain Sarah Chen, now Major Sarah Chen, would receive occasional messages from former students. They'd tell her about missions they'd flown, about difficult decisions they'd made, about moments when they'd remembered something she'd taught them. Some would thank her for the technical skills, others would thank her for the wisdom. A few would thank her for believing in them when others didn't. She'd respond to each one with the same message: pass it forward. Teach the next generation what you've learned. The profession is only as strong as the people we develop to carry it forward. Because that was the real lesson of her journey, not that she'd overcome adversity or proven doubters wrong or earned recognition she'd been denied. The real lesson was that every struggle, every setback, every moment of doubt had been preparing her for the role she was meant to fill, not just as a pilot, but as a teacher, mentor, and guardian of professional standards. Her grandmother had known this. The compass had been trying to tell her all along. True north wasn't about reaching a destination. It was about becoming the kind of person who could help others find their own way. And in the end,
That was worth more than any medal, any recognition, any personal vindication. That was the silence between thunder, not the dramatic moments that made headlines, but the quiet work of showing up, doing the job, and helping others do the same, day after day, mission after mission, year after year. That was courage. That was service. That was legacy. And that was enough. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more real military stories. These experiences define what service truly means: the quiet moments of courage, the patient development of competence, the understanding that recognition matters far less than the work itself. Share your own stories in the comments. Tell us about the people who believed in you when others didn't. Tell us about the struggles that prepared you for success. Tell us about finding your own true north when the path wasn't clear. Because these stories matter. The people who live them deserve to be heard, and the lessons they've learned deserve to be passed forward to the next generation. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your patience through difficult times. Thank you for showing up when it mattered most, even when no one was watching. Fly safe, stay humble, keep teaching, and remember, true north isn't always where you're told to look.